All right, our next speaker, Melissa Perri, is going to take the product-led discussion one step further. She is the CEO of Product Labs, author of Escaping the Build Trap, and a product management teacher at Harvard Business School. She's advised hundreds of product executives on how to take a seat at the table. From org design, hiring, product operations, and board management, she has a wealth of knowledge. Please give a warm welcome to Melissa.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be with you. This is my first conference since COVID, so I'm excited to be back. Yeah. So nice to see people, not their heads on Zoom screens, but in real person. So today I'm really excited to talk to you about chief product officers and what we could do to be better chief product officers. So I wrote Escaping the Build Trap about 4 years ago now. I don't know, time stopped during COVID, so I have no idea what year it is. But I wrote it a couple years ago. And before that too, I was working with organizations to help them set up good product management organizations. And we've come a really long way since I started. You know, we've got the Agile thing down, mostly. Most people are doing Agile. We realize that data is very important. I don't have to argue with people about doing user research as much anymore. And something that I've been advocating for a lot, more chief product officers, more representation in the C-suite, it's actually happening, which is fantastic. But one of the problems is that we don't have a lot of existing chief product officers out there. So we have a lot of first-time CPOs. And many people get into the position, and they're like, okay, now what? What do I do, right? And there's no roadmap. Nobody's like, hey, sit down and let me tell you how to be a CPO, right? You're usually figuring it out once you get in there. So where I've spent my time for the last couple of years has really been helping organizations figure out what is the role of a chief product officer and what do they actually do. And I really love this definition by Georgie Smallwood, who is the chief product officer of Tier Mobility. She says, the role of the CPO is essentially the same as being a product manager. You are the intersection of the user and the business, but the stakes are much higher. And that's true, right? It's not just about the product anymore. When you become a chief product officer, it's also about the business. You are a steward of the entire business. And your job is to figure out how do we make fantastic products that further that business. So we really want to make sure that we are doing that well. That's what we want to get into. But we also want to make sure that once we land this role of the CPO, we don't lose it. And that's a big problem, right? So one pattern that I've seen is a lot of first-time chief product officers getting ousted from their jobs. I'm serious about this. A lot of people get into the job, they work really, really hard, and they get kicked out. And what I want to talk to you today about is how to keep that job once you actually get it. And that's what I've been doing in what I call the Cpo Accelerator. So I've been training a lot of VPs of product and first-time CPOs and helping them understand what it is to be a product executive. So I'm going to give you some of the tips that I teach them about how to land this role, but also how to keep this role. And some of the most common pitfalls I see in people getting ousted. Also, I want to say too, though, there is a big difference, right, between software native chief product officers and non-software native chief product officers. So what do I mean by that? Software native are SaaS companies. You sell software. Software, money. Easy, right? And then we've got our banks and we've got our pharmaceutical companies and our insurance companies and everything else where you don't specifically sell software. There's some kind of other thing tied to it as well. So we do need chief product officers in both of these places. And digital chief product officers, not just banking chief product officers, not products in the form of that product, digital chief product officers. And what I'm going to talk about today applies to both of these people, but we're also going to break down a little bit of the differences that we have here too. How many of you came from the business side into product, just by a show of hands? Cool, okay, great. And then how many of you came up through product management from a technology standpoint? Okay, great, we got a nice little even split. So we'll talk about the differences that I see there in how chief product officers operate, depending on where their backgrounds come from. First thing though, that I see, biggest pitfall, is not speaking the language. And I'm not talking about like Spanish versus English here. It's the language of the business. So one common thing that I hear from new chief product officers all the time, my executives just don't get it. They don't get it. Why? Why don't they get it? How are you communicating with your executives? What are you talking about? Well, I'm telling them all about Agile, and I'm breaking it down for them, and they're really interested in our sprint backlogs and how we plan it, but all I keep getting from them is, nope, not interested. That's because this is not the language, right? This is our language as product and tech people, but this is not the language of executives. What is the language of executives? Money, right? Money. They want to know, how do you make money? And so often, I find that people get into the weeds of, what are we doing with our sprint planning meetings, and what do our backlogs look like, and what are our roadmaps going to do? And we forget to actually pull that up and relate it to how the business is functioning, how the business is going to make money, and pulling it back into revenue and cost. When you become a chief product officer, this is huge. You need to be able to talk about how the business makes money. That is incredibly important. So another great quote here from Guijo Matthew. He is the chief product officer of VTS. He says, if you don't know what are the most important outcomes for the business, then you have to get smart on that. If you do, then you have to be able to identify and execute a strategy to get that outcome. So this is incredibly important, right? What are the outcomes for your business? If you don't know what those are, ask your executives. What are we trying to do? I work with a lot of companies too that are like venture backed, or they got VC money, PE money, something like that. There's usually some kind of agenda there. They have an exit expectation. They have a goal that they're actually striving for. You need to understand what that is, because you're going to be making decisions based on those types of outcomes, not necessarily just on customer problems. It's going to be related back into a business outcome. So we're solving customer problems through business outcomes. Reaching business outcomes through solving customer problems. That's what we're really, really trying to do here. So you need to understand that, and you need to be able to frame what you're doing in a way that connects it back to what this business outcome is. That's incredibly important. So what does that mean? That means that we want to be able to talk about how we're making different strategic moves. And the things that we're doing here, like going up market, attacking new markets, they add new customers, we're growing LTV, we could integrate partners with that. What's your strategy for product that's going to relate to these outcomes? What are the most important outcomes your business is looking for? Is it to grow this? Is it to grow that? Is it to reduce costs? Whatever it is, relate what you're doing back to that. Trace it all the way through. So in order to do that too, we need to relate our story, what we're trying to do, to this bigger picture. So connecting it back to the vision, connecting it back to the strategy of what we're trying to get after. In order to do that, we need a product strategy. So product strategy is a framework that enables teams to make product decisions about how to provide customer value, which in turn drives business value. So this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to explain our product strategy in the terms of the business outcomes. And this is the second pitfall that I see new CPOs make. It's that they don't spend time on setting the product strategy. This is what you were hired for. So what do we do instead? We get into the weeds with the teams, right? We get really, really tactical. When we look at the different levels of product management, this is how I like to think about them. We've got our team level product managers, associate level product managers, senior PMs. They're mostly tactical. And what that means is they're working with teams. They're thinking about what feature are we building, they're doing product backlogs, they're really getting into it there. When you get to be a chief product officer, you're mostly strategic. And then in the middle there is operational. And what operational does is it makes sure that we can tie these tactical feature developments back into the strategic work. And strategy is about, how am I going to reach the business vision, right? How am I going to reach the business vision? How am I going to reach the business outcomes? It's laying that path forward, and it's making that framework so that people can actually do that. So that's what we need to be concentrating on as a CPO. And I see a lot of CPOs go do everything else except that. But that's what you were hired for. That is the job of a chief product officer, is to build the product strategy. And that needs to be a huge part of your focus. So how do we actually do that? And what's a good product strategy actually look like? I try to describe it like this in a 4-level framework. At the top, we've got our vision. Where do we want to be in 5 to 10 years? What's our value for a customer? What's our position in the market? What's our business look like? And us as senior leadership now helps set that with the CEO. It's going to be primarily the CEO setting this, but we're contributing to it, right? We're a partnership now. Then we have strategic intents. And strategic intents are what business challenges are standing in the way of reaching our vision. So these are things like, in order to get there, we need to move up market. We need to expand geographically. They're very big business pushes. And you are responsible for setting that with the rest of the C-suite. Those are the strategic intents. They help align where we want to go, and we have conversations about how we're going to get there and what we're capable of actually doing. Then we connect that back into the software products. So we say, what's our product initiatives? We look at our product portfolio. We say, hey, we've got all these different software things going on. What problems can we address to tackle that challenge from a product perspective? And then product leadership team and below is really setting that. And then our teams are working on options, which are your solutions. What are the different ways I can address that problem to reach my goal? Product teams and product managers are working on this. One of the biggest issues I see in companies that are not software native, they are your software-enabled companies, your banks, your insurance companies, not traditionally selling software, is that they do not understand that product management is a business function as well as a tech function. And this whole thing gets lost. They don't do this. They don't connect the business back into the strategy of product. And they don't figure out what are the things that we can do with technology that differentiate us from anyone else, that make us be able to do things that we've never thought capable of doing before. That's how you win in an industry, right? That's how you disrupt an industry, is to really think about what can I do with technology that I've never been able to do before. So this, as a chief product officer of that type of company, really making sure you're doing strategy deployment well, bringing the leadership together to be able to do this, and connecting it back into your products, and making sure product is represented in that business strategy too. That's where it becomes really important. That's the key to success right here. So what's an example of this? Let me give you an example of an electronic health record system. So for instance, quite a few years ago, I was working with a company that did electronic health record systems for behavioral therapists. So they've got this vision, be the electronic health record system of choice for behavioral therapists. There was nobody really in the market at the time. The alternative was paper. Good spot to be in. And one of their strategic intents, there's usually multiple. I say no more than 3 though. I've watched people try to do 64 of them. It does not work. I know everybody will try to do more, but it does not work. This provides focus for your teams and alignment. So one of them was expand upmarket into larger practices to increase your SAM, serviceable addressable market. Then we started to look at the product teams, and we looked at our customers, and we said, what could we do to help our customers? And we found out that one big problem that larger practices had was trouble retaining the therapists because of their poor workflows to actually do their jobs and scheduling. So we said, that's something we can actually fix. So this is a problem we want to solve, and that became a big product initiative made up of multiple features and multiple solutions to actually tackle it. One was a staff scheduling functionality, and one was better workflows and tools. So what we're doing here is we're creating a lot of focus, and we're aligning people, especially through those middle areas, right, of the product initiatives and connecting it back to the business strategy. And everybody in your organization should be able to tell the story from options all the way back up to the visions and how it should be able to reach it. And your job as a CPO is to enable that, right? It's to make sure that that story is able to be told. So that's key right there. When we think about setting product strategy, though, in any kind of decisions like this, it includes so much information that you have to take in, though. We're not just like sitting around being like, that would be cool to build, even though some people in the organization probably think that's our job. So what we should be looking at, though, is tons of customer and user research, technology implications, user data, market research and data, financial data and implications of sales, like a lot, right? If you're a product manager in here, you're like, yeah, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of things that go into that. Now, how do you get those things, right? It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of work. A lot of organizations and a lot of people will just jump into assumptions and whatever they think should be the next thing, instead of taking the time to actually crunch all of these numbers and figure out what's next. And this is key. We want to make sure that we're taking the time to get all of this information and also delegating the job of gathering a bunch of this information so that we, as a chief product officer, can make a decision. And based off that decision, too, comes something that's a little controversial to talk about, which is estimates. A lot of times in product management, we don't like to talk about estimates. We're like, no estimates. There is a whole agile movement of no estimates, which I hate. It's not practical to just say, nah, I'm not going to tell you when this thing is ever going to be built, right? And I'm not talking about like promising Bob that on October 10th at 2:45 p.m. he gets his feature to sell to people. I'm talking about like, is this a first quarter thing or a second quarter thing or a third quarter? We need to be able to realistically tell people, especially our board, especially our executive team, when they might be expected to be able to sell things. And I'm not just saying like from the first idea that comes to your head, you should be able to make an estimate, but as we go, we should get better and more firm about being able to predict those things. So we really want to make sure that we are accurately measuring our capabilities as a chief product officer. What can our team do? How fast can they deliver software? What can we do to ensure that we know when we can start booking revenue? Because that's key. You are now going to be working with people to say like, hey, when this feature comes out, we could start selling it. We expect to make this much money, et cetera, right? That's what you need to be able to do as a CPO. So in order to do that, though, and get all of these numbers, comes our next pitfall, which is not setting up the systems and the people to scale. Too often, though, we don't hire fast enough. I know there's a whole thing where people say, you know, hire slow and fire fast. But I see people just not hire and then try to do it all themselves. So you need to be able to get the people in there to help you get this data and make these decisions as a chief product officer. So that's really important. So where do we start? First, we need to make sure we start with hiring our team. Do we have people to do the tactical work with the developers? You should not be looking through code as a chief product officer. You should not be going through a backlog. If I see people going through a backlog, I like smack their hand. No, get out of there. Right? That's not your job. You need to be spending time on the product strategy. So we want to make sure that we can also answer these questions after we have the team too. So we have our team, and then we got to answer questions. We've got what products and segments are the most profitable, which features are driving sales and adoption by segment, which products have the most time invested in bug fixes. All of these questions help us set product strategy. How do we actually answer those questions? That's where a fun little role called product ops comes in. So we hire people to help us actually answer these questions. And one of those first people that you should be hiring is a product operations role. So product operations, when we start to think about it, actually I break it down into 3 different areas. One is business data and insights. That's the collection and analysis of internal data for strategy creation and monitoring. So that's basically like using your amplitude data to come in and figure out what your customer cohorts are doing. It's also going into your financial systems and seeing how much revenue you have booked per customer segment. Is there pricing and packaging misalignment? All of those things can come from internal systems. Then you've got your customer and market insights, which is facilitation and aggregation of external research. So this department is really helping us make sure that we could talk to customers. It's not doing the customer research for us. It's helping us actually be able to go find customers to talk to. And then lastly, it's our processes and practices. So things like how do we standardize our roadmaps so that I can compare apples to apples and not apples to like, you know, nectarines and oranges over here. I want to be able to make sure we're all on the same track as a chief product officer and be able to bubble that up so I can communicate it well to my executives and my board, right? So that's what the facilitation of processes and practices are. So I'd say one of the first key hires that I would do as a chief product officer, and one that I've seen work really, really well, is that business data and insights piece. Usually if you're a smaller, high growth company, product strategy is your number one thing that you've got to execute on as rapidly as possible. The market's changing, you're growing really, really fast. You need to be able to make decisions in real time. So I'd hire a data person to help with the business data and insights. If you're a really large enterprise company, they tend to gravitate towards roadmaps, standardization of roadmaps, and that's because they need to figure out what everybody's doing and be able to compare it across the board. Wherever you start, this is a key function that I suggest all chief product officers really need to hire. The next pitfall is not remembering your first team is your executive team. It is really comfortable for us as product managers to go and hang out with our team, all of our product managers. And I've seen a lot of people do that. They're like, cool, I've got my product managers, I'm gonna build my team, I'm gonna stay with them. And that's fantastic, but what happens is they forget that they're part of the executive team. And you know what happens? The executive team conspires against them and kicks them out. So you wanna make sure that you are part of this team too, and you see that as your first team. So what does that mean? You're collaborating with the whole rest of the C-suite, you're talking to them, you're now friends with them, and that also includes sales. Sales is now your best friend. Chief revenue officers are now your best friend, which could feel really weird growing up in product. I know, because we'd all be like, I hate sales, right? They're overselling my roadmap. These guys kind of suck over here. They're really pushy. Now, I'm sorry to say, you got to suck it up and be friends with sales. So you need to go make best friends with the chief revenue officer. You need to be in lockstep, in sync. If you ask any chief product officer what the best relationships they need to have are, they're going to tell you, the CRO and I are best friends and we need to be best friends. And if you're not, there's going to be a lot of problems because you should be figuring out the roadmap and new features and all these different things together. That's absolutely key. So sales is now your best friend, but the rest of the C-suite is as well. And you need to make sure you're building those relationships. Brian Buda is the chief product officer of Forsta. He and I have worked together for a really long time. And he is one of the best operators I've seen as a chief product officer making friends with executive teams. I've watched him walk into really hostile environments and turn it around very fast. And he says that the secret to this is to stay humble, listen and ask questions. You don't want to barge into an executive team and be like, I know better than you, blah, 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 like get out of here, product, woo. You want to make sure that you're understanding what they do, you're staying humble, you're listening, you're asking questions of them, and you're making sure that you're all in sync. And also, it's not about winning a battle. Have the self-confidence and awareness of what success really is for you. Sometimes you give other people credit. It makes them look good, you get what you want, you get further your agenda. At the end of the day, it all works out. Another thing that you need to do is really build trust. So Giff Constable, who is a former chief product officer of Meetup, he says, expect that you need to build trust, don't presume it, do invest in it, and don't think it happens overnight. So you want to make sure that you're talking to the rest of your executives, you're sitting with them, you're hanging out with them, you're getting to know them on a personal level, but you're also showing up and executing on what you were there for. I'm going to go back to the product strategy part, and making sure that you could show them that you can do your job, and that helps establish trust. I see a lot of people think that they just deserve trust for being in the position, and that's not true. You have to earn it, and you have to make sure that you're pulling your weight to establish it. That's absolutely key. The last one is an interesting one. It's not being in the right situation for your skill set. Now, this is huge. We all like to think that chief product officers are made equal, but they're not. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story of when I was working with the CEO. I told him about chief product officers, convinced him that he really needed a chief product officer, and he said, great, go get me one. He's at a high growth company, and he wants one. So they brought in a recruiter who started looking for CPOs. And this recruiter started bringing me people to interview. And the first person was from a large global financial software system. He was overseeing 10,000 people. He inherited the product from someone else, and he's been keeping it alive for years. And after the interview, I tell them, that's not our fit. We're a high-growth SaaS company. We need somebody who can rapidly evolve with that, build new products. They've got a different profile. So they bring me more people, and I keep saying no, and no, and no. And 6 months later, the CEO is like, excuse me, did I stutter? I said, find me a chief product officer. And I had to explain to them that just because there's a title, chief product officer, in somebody's resume, doesn't mean that we're all actually the same type of chief product officer. So when we look at the scorecard for product leaders, the way that we evaluate it is, one, with product strategy. What's your size of your portfolio? What's your type of products? What's your experience with growth? Your org design. What's your team building skills? What's your, how do you coach junior members? What's your attracting talent, setting up ops? Your process implementer. What's your previous experience building processes? I look for people who can work with exec teams, and also other factors depending on this as well, like M&A, pricing and packaging. Do you need to oversee design and engineering? Do you have experience with that too? So we build these scorecards to find chief product officers, and then we go out and actually find them. But Just because they have a CPO and a title doesn't mean they're the right fit for the company. It has to match on these. And there's typically 3 different types of chief product officers. There's an enterprise CPO, a startup VP, and a scale-up CPO. So your context here is king about which of these people you actually want. And the type of company you're at is going to dictate who you get. So a startup VP is usually good at going from $0 to $20 million. Their coaching teams are setting up processes, and they're usually in the weeds executing still. Difference between VP and CPO right here, too. There's huge founder dynamics at play. Anybody with crazy founders is like, yeah. And product strategy is about finding product market fit and rapid experimentation. Compare that, though, to a growth stage CPO. They're usually going from 30 million in ARR up to an IPO. Product strategies and portfolios are more complicated. We've got M&A problems. We've got board presentations. Financials are absolutely crucial here. And scaling team and infrastructure is really important. Sometimes you're taking on things like pricing and packaging, M&A, other different types of things that are not traditionally product. So you have a very wide breadth here as a growth stage CPO, and you need to be able to flex. Then you got your enterprise CPOs for really large companies. Politics. If you don't like politics, do not be a chief product officer in enterprise. So politics are at play here. Definitely need a financial acumen. Navigating bureaucracy, compliance and legal are huge, and you have massive scale. Typically here, our VPs are owning individual product strategies on business lines, and we're helping trying to figure out what's the overall portfolio for the entire business, usually platform strategies, and helping make sure that we're setting guidelines and scaling it. So you want to make sure that you find the right place for you. And I'm going to tell you about Ted. Ted was a CPO at a high growth company, and his rocket ship was scaling like crazy. And he did really, really well there. He was there early on. He's really good at going from 0 to 10. And what happened? That company merged with another rocket ship, and pretty soon it became a cruise liner. So we've got 2 rocket ships sitting on top of a boat, and Ted started to get worried. Ted was a little bit out of his element, and he was like, hey, I'm okay, but wait, what? What's going on here? And he started to get really uncomfortable. And that's because Ted is not the enterprise CPO. Ted was more of a startup VP / growth stage CPO. He erred on that side. And he thought that there was something wrong with him. But there wasn't anything wrong with him, right? It was just not the right context for him. So he eventually left, and he went back to a single rocket ship, and he actually helped that rocket ship grow and get merged with a really large company, had a nice exit. So here it's really about finding what's the right fit for you, right? It's not always about figuring out what's bigger or better. Your career is not always a straight line, and you have to say, hey, that's it for me sometimes, right? Like, that's it. I'm not here anymore. I'm out of my context. It's time for me to move on. So that's incredibly important, knowing when is the right time to go. So remember, like, your career is not a straight about going from startup to larger company to larger company to larger company to Google, right? Like, it's not about that. It's about figuring out what you're really good at. What's your skill set, and where can I thrive and add value? So these are the pitfalls that I see most chief product officers make, and especially first-time CPOs. And I really hope that I can help you avoid them, because we need more chief product officers out there. It's one of the most in-demand roles. You can't hire for it fast enough. It usually takes us like 6 months to find people for these jobs. So I really hope that a lot of people in this room aspire to be a chief product officer or are a chief product officer. But when you land that job, I really want you to keep it. So make sure you're communicating well with your board and your team. Make sure that you're spending time on setting product strategy. Make sure you're setting up the systems and the people to scale. Make sure that you're remembering that your first team is your executive team, and then find the right situation for your skill set. So thank you very much. If you are interested in these slides, email Melissa at sendyourslides.com, put the subject CPO now, and it automatically will send it to you. And if you are a first-time CPO looking for help, we do have Cpo Accelerator, where you can join a network of other people as well who are in the same position as you. Thank you very much.